This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW, Flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of Masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. The next, ad-libbing now, the next 13 or so flyers are very early flyers that I wrote more than 2 years ago, when I was just starting to get into learning about the ideas of the MGTOWs. So you may find the views expressed in these 13 flyers less influenced by MGTOW ideas and more masculist, because I've been a masculist since the 70s. I mean, I coined the term in the early 70s. This flyer is flyer number 198, entitled Fluffies, Feminists, MGTOWs and Masculists. Flyer itself. In fact, I think I sent this to Sandman, and he made a video about it. Fluffies, Feminists, MGTOWs and Masculists, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Abstract. MGTOWs, men going their own way, that is, men refusing to have relationships with women, are merely reacting to the status quo, rather than taking the more assertive approach of the Masculists to change that status quo through political and ideological action. This essay shows what Masculists can do to change society so that the MGTOW reaction is no longer necessary and the two sexes can get along better. If this is the first essay you have ever read on the topic of masculism, which is men's lib, then perhaps I should initially give a quick rundown on the main ideas of the Masculists. Firstly, masculism is not male feminism. It's a social movement by men for men, doing for men what feminism does for women. That is, it aims to liberate men from customs in our cultures that oppress and enslave men. In essence, masculism is a rebellion by men against working for women. After men invented the contraceptive pill, household gadgets, and higher education, it became possible for women to control the number of kids they had and to go out to work, thus sharing equally with men the burden of earning the living for the family. When the Industrial Revolution came, families had to be mobile to seek employment. This led to the growth of the nuclear family. Better hygiene, particularly public sewers, allowed babies to survive, so families became bigger. The father then became the sole breadwinner, while the mother stayed at home to raise the many children. Once the pill arrived in the 1960s, women had been having only 1 or 2 children, so that Western populations are now falling. When women started moving into the workforce in huge numbers, they were confronted with traditional males who had trouble adapting to the historic tectonic shift in gender roles. The feminist movement grew up to push hard for women's rights, the right to abortion, to equal pay, to equal work opportunities, for daycare centres, to be treated as equals by men, etc. Women organised politically, creating such organisations as NOW, now National Organisation of Women in the US, and women's issues committees in national parliaments across the world. They were largely successful in achieving their goals. In the 1980s, men started waking up to the idea that now that women can work, they must work, otherwise they remain financial parasites on men. The masculist movement grew up, at least in Europe, to push women to become careerists equally with men, so that the burden of earning the living for the family could be shared out equally. Unfortunately, the masculist movement did not grow anywhere near as large as the feminist movement. This was due mostly to the fact that the major push of the masculists, namely to get fluffies into careers, was already being pushed by the feminists for feminist reasons. A fluffy is a masculist label for a traditional woman who expects to be able to parasite off the money of a man. It's based on the word fluff, that is, with connotations of being light, not serious, not adult, not mature, not responsible, not FIP, that's FIP, financially independent person. Due to the feminist pressure to get women into the workforce so that women could be financially independent, the wind was blown out of the sails of the Masculists, so it never really grew into a major social force. But now something new is happening between the sexes that requires that the Masculist movement needs to be revived. Feminists have now largely taken over the legislation on gender issues to the detriment of men. The Masculist movement is needed to restore the balance so that both sexes are given a fair shake. I think that's an Aussie expression. Once feminists started becoming politicians, divorce court judges, etc., they brought in with them their feminist attitudes and their ignorance of Masculist attitudes, since they were never educated in the latter. As a result of this, men are now being screwed badly to such a point that men in their millions are opting out of traditional marriages and refuse even to live together with women. Correspondingly, millions of women who have done well in their early careers are finding a desperate shortage of men who are willing to put up with the status quo. Millions of men are becoming MGTOWs, men going their own way, that is, without women, who refuse to love women and to give them children, thus making millions of women very unhappy. How did this situation come about? Once women became FIPs, a FIP is a Masculist label for financially independent person, the type of woman Masculists want women to be, they became much easier to divorce. If you look at photos of your great-grandparents, many of them look sad and bitter because they were stuck in marriages that had failed, but they did not attempt to get out of them as we do today. The divorce rate in many countries is now around half. 1 in 2 marriages end in divorce. So for the past few decades, men have been screwed in huge numbers by both their ex-wives and by the legal system that has been set up by feminists who are incapable of thinking along Masculist lines, since they are women and have not been exposed to Masculist political pressures and ideology. In the divorce court, millions of men were forced to continue paying for their fluffy ex-wives after divorce became easier. This created real bitterness in men. Feminist divorce courts would often deny fathers the right to see their own children. This created more male bitterness. Women are genetically wired to want children and to raise them. Men are genetically wired to want to penis women. That is the strategy that has evolved in nature to ensure the creation of the next generation. However, women's fertility drops off badly in their mid-30s, so many women get desperate to have children at that age once their careers have been well launched. But they run up against the serious lack of men who are prepared to marry and be fathers because of the very negative experiences they have had in the past with feminist-dominated divorce courts, alimony laws, men dumping feminists, societal put-downs of men, etc. MGTOWs take the attitude, I'm tired of being shafted, I'll go my own way from now on, screw women, or rather let some other sucker screw them and then be shafted. I'm done with women. Many of these MGTOWed women then get bitter at the lack of available men and take matters into their own hands. They have a child as a single mother, which they can do because they have a career and can afford to raise the child. But in practice, due to the mother's time commitment with her full-time job, she tends to have her child raised by a childminder who is often of a lower class in intelligence than herself. She then misses out on the full experience of motherhood because she's working so much. Little boys now are often raised in fatherless homes and in primary schools dominated by careerist feminist women teachers who alienate these little boys. The boys have no male role models, so grow up lost. They feel dumped on by their female feminist teachers who continue to criticize men as rapists, chauvinists, oppressors, etc. Feminist women still have fluffy attitudes towards men, which is something a revived Masculist movement needs to address. These fluffy feminists will still see men as checkbooks that they can exploit, which is a carryover from the traditional gender roles prior to the 1970s. Masculists need to educate women and society in general that women have a powerful moral obligation to pull their weight financially and not parasite on a man's money. The Masculists have a very effective strategy to force women to be FIPs, and that is, Masculists simply refuse to have relationships with Fluffies. When I was one of the Masculist leaders in the 1980s in Europe, we used to say to men on the media, rather a FIP than a Fluffy. A Fluffy will parasite on you before the divorce and after. To Fluffies we said, if you want to have a man, have a career. Fluffies can rot on the shelf. A Fluffy can only be a Fluffy if she can get her financial claws into some robot male. But as the supply of robot males dries up, as they become influenced by masculist ideas, Fluffies will be forced to convert themselves into FIPs if they want to eat. A robot male is a masculist term for a traditional male who expects to be parasited upon by a Fluffy, but he does not see himself as enslaved, since he has been unconsciously brainwashed into that role, as is still the case today in Korea and Japan, whose gender roles are half a century behind the Western countries. No wonder Japanese men look so miserable in the train, commuting 3 hours a day to their 11-hour-a-day jobs, while their fluffy wives with teenage kids play tennis and cards with their fluffy friends. Masculists need to get active again and get on the media and change legislation to restore the imbalance that has grown up due to the virtual monopoly of feminists controlling gender issues in politics. At the grassroots level, this could take the form of the following little exchange. Imagine a group of women in a bar trying to pick up some good-looking men. The women go up to the men and say, "How about you men buy us ladies a drink?" Imagine their shock if the men are masculists and they hit back, "How about you ladies buy us a drink, you fluffy parasites?" Women need to be taught that men are not to be exploited financially, as was the custom with traditional gender roles. A woman who does not get off her ass and becomes career competent and simply expects some male to relieve her of that burden will simply remain manless and hence unloved and unsexed, since 99.5% of women are heterosexual. The masculists lash out at the many legal discriminations that still exist against men. The most blatant discrimination concerns the lack of a male equivalent to the MARA, maternity rejection right, commonly known as abortion right. If a woman gets pregnant and does not want to go through with the pregnancy, she can get an abortion. She has a legislated MARA, thanks to the feminist political pressure in the 70s. But women have no equivalent PARA, paternity rejection right. So if a couple gets pregnant and the man does not want to be a father, he should be given the equivalent right to reject fatherhood. He should be able to go to a JP, Justice of the Peace, and deposit a formal rejection of fatherhood form before the legal time limit, before an abortion becomes illegal because the pregnancy has continued too long. If the woman decides to continue with the pregnancy, then the child is her financial responsibility. In today's feminist-dominated gender legislation system, the man is still seen as the breadwinner, and feminist judges argue that, for the sake of the child, the father must pay. To fight this attitude, the masculists need to create a formidable political force to stop it and change the legislation. Women are to be powerfully persuaded they are to be FIPs, who cannot rely on a man to pay for her children. Masculists say cynically that the life plan of a Fluffy is to seduce the richest and most handsome guy she can, fuck him long enough that he sticks around, and then stay at home to have her kids and have him pay for it all, both before and after the divorce. Masculists utterly reject this attitude and spit on such women, treating them as slavers, enslavers of men, manslavers. Masculists push women to be as career competent as men, so that when a woman does want to continue a pregnancy when the father rejects fatherhood, she can cope financially. A woman who is career incompetent and gets pregnant and then expects her boyfriend to pay for the child ruins that man's life. The feminist bias court system agrees with the woman and also ruins the man's life. This injustice has to stop. Hence the masculists need to have the legislation change. As males, with our much higher testosterone levels, we can get a lot angrier than a bunch of angry feminists. That collective masculist male anger needs to be directed at the feminist biased gender legal system to bring fairness to males. Laws need to be changed. Masculists are also angry at the lack of respect that feminists give men in general. Too many feminists feel that they have the right to dump on men, given that they are well informed of the way men abuse women, but are not well versed in the reverse case. Masculists need to stop such feminists in their tracks when they dump on men in public to mixed audiences. Masculist leaders who are brilliant and articulate should get on the media and give men the intellectual tools to counter these feminist dumpings on males. For example, imagine some feminist woman making some snide remark about men during a meeting, and unfortunately for her, the audience contains a highly articulate, brilliant-minded, masculist scientist who then cuts her to pieces with well-reasoned, scientifically based facts that no one can refute. He puts her in her place so that next time she'll think twice about making her feelings about men public through fear of being confronted again by a superior male who crushes her ego. To be more specific, imagine the masculist scientist interjecting, "Hey lady, if you're going to dump on men in public to a mixed audience, I as a masculist will dump on you right back, you fat unfuckable," which is the direct translation of the French gros imbézable, a commonly used term in French culture. Men are the superior sex. We have a 4 IQ point greater average IQ score than women, says Prof. Philippe Rushton. We have a 10% higher IQ variance than women. The male IQ bell curve is shorter and fatter than women's, which is thinner and taller. So at the extreme fringes, the left and the right, that is the morons and the genii, are males. So it's not surprising we males win 99% of the Science Nobel Prizes. We make up 95% of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, 95% of presidents and prime ministers of countries. Our testosterone levels are a lot higher than women's. So we're more aggressive, more dogged, more persistent, more ambitious. So we greatly outperform women in virtually all fields. So it's to be expected that in nearly all cultures, men are more respected than women. Hence boy babies are more valued than girl babies, who traditionally are often left out in the cold at birth to die. So if I were you, lady, I'd refrain from dumping on men in public, because there might be a brilliant, articulate masculist in the audience who fights back and hurts you personally by telling you in public that you're rather fat and ugly, about a 3 out of 10, and hence most men reject you. So you've learned to hate men and lock yourself into a vicious circle. The more you express your hatred of men publicly, the more men reject you, thus increasing your hatred of men, and you're too dumb to get out of it. Masculists need to organise politically. We need to remove the many illegal discriminations against men. There's quite a list of them. For example, many countries have a difference in retirement ages. Most countries do not put women into combat, arguing women's bodies are more valuable than men's bodies. Masculists need to botch that attitude, so blatantly unjust. There's a life expectancy difference between the sexes of about 6 years in many countries. Masculists need to fight the tobacco companies who have killed men in the hundreds of millions by targeting them in their ads. Tobacco killed about 100 million people in the 20th century. If men did not smoke, the life expectancy difference would be a lot less. If both sexes were in wars, then the differences would be lower again. Women need to do half of the dangerous jobs as well, so that they too fall off buildings. On the psychological side, masculists need to lash out at female sexual cowardice. Even most feminists are afraid to take sexual initiatives, so it's not surprising that feminists talk about a rape culture and claim that all men are rapists, which is about as stupid as masculists claiming that all women are parasites on men. With women taking half of the sexual initiatives, there will be as much talk of sexual harassment of men by women as vice versa, so that women will learn to feel how sexual rejection hurts. Imagine some women going up to an attractive, intelligent man, propositioning him, and getting the reply, "No thanks, you're too fat, too ugly, too dumb, too low class. Try some man of your own level." Men go through this kind of rejection all the time, because women are such sexual cowards, which makes masculists not respect most women on the sexual front, even most feminists. Masculists understand the reaction of the MGTOWs, but do not agree with the latter's politics. MGTOWs simply react to the status quo, rather than fighting to change it the way the Masculists do. Once the Masculists have been successful in returning the pendulum to its middle position, where both women's and men's rights are both fairly addressed, when men are not extorted in divorce courts, treated as exploitable checkbooks by fluffies and fluffy feminists, and are respected for being the superior sex on genetic grounds, then MGTOWism will disappear. To be happy, the two sexes need each other for companionship, love and sex. The pre-feminist period was unacceptable. The current feminist period is unacceptable. Hopefully, the future feminist masculist period will be better balanced, where the two sexes respect each other more. Feminists will have both their feminist consciousness raised and their masculist consciousness raised, because they will have been taught by brilliant masculists whose intellects are superior to theirs, being male, that men outclass women on nearly all counts and therefore should be respected. To men and to MGTOWs, your task is only beginning, so get to it. Start organising and ideologising to change the misandrous psychology of women and to change the laws that discriminate against men. Cheers, Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. YouTube channel name De Garis Masculist MGTOW Flyers. Ciao.